So last fall, while I wasn't able to interview actors during the SAG-AFTRA strike, I passed that time by looking back on many nostalgic productions that a lot of us know and love, many of which were Halloween-based, similar to when I do Nostalgia Talk Christmas Bonus every year. And I enjoyed looking back on these so much that I decided to look back on some more nostalgic and obscure Halloween-related projects, or projects with a Halloween theme, once every week from now until Halloween. For a lot of us, when we think about Halloween, we think about Scooby Doo. And last year I looked back on the first 3 Scooby Doo direct-to-video movies, so I decided to carry on from there with the next in the series, Scooby Doo and the Cyber Chase. Our story begins in a college lab. Science teacher Professor Kaufman asks his student Eric about his progress on a project he's working on. Eric answers that something's wrong with the program, and Professor Kaufman demands that Eric and the other students fix the problem to prevent further experimental delays. Eric's friend Bill shares that he's found something, but it activates their laser. Bill tries to shut it down, but is unable to before this very strange blue glowing creature shows up and collects data from the other lab computers. Eric tries to call security, but the creature pulls the wires out of the phone, using them to wrap Eric's wrist. Meanwhile, the Mystery Inc. gang is en route to visit Eric, a friend of the gang's. The gang praises Eric's smarts and creativity, with Velma calling him one smart cookie, which really gets Scooby-Doo's attention. According to Fred, Eric made a computer game starring the entire Mystery Inc. gang where they solve mysteries in cyberspace, while Shaggy is playing a handheld video game kinda like Space Invaders, but he isn't having much luck. Finally, the gang arrives at Eric's university, but gets stopped by a very tough-looking security guard, who questions where the group is heading. Velma answers that they're going to visit Eric, but the security guard tells them, "Not if you're not on my list!" You know, it's not very hard for the security guard to just ask for their names. There's no need for him to be so aggressive. Fred tells the security guard that the visit is in his name, and the security guard questions if the whole group is indeed together, including the dog. And like in the last 3 Scooby-Doo movies, how do you think Scooby responds to that? Wrong? Rare! Finally, the security guard sees Fred's name, and before he lets them go visit Eric, he tells them, "I don't like a bunch of punks running around my university." I'm pretty sure that the security guard doesn't own the university, and when Daphne questions him about that, the security guard tells the gang that he's been there for 20 years and goes on about how there's never been any trouble with him around, while Scooby takes his hat and mimics him. Man, this is just one of those guys who acts like he's more important than anybody else. Sheesh. As he keeps on going, he realizes that Scooby got his hat and turns to him and says, "I'm keeping a special eye on you, Pooch." To finally get the security guard, who reveals his name is Wembley, to shut up, Fred asks if he can help them get into the computer lab, and he shows them where to go. The gang makes it to the computer lab as Eric shows them around. Shaggy and Scooby find themselves impressed by the very large tomato plants, but Bill warns them not to eat them because they were grown in radioactive soil, so Eric promises to take the gang out to dinner after the tour. Shaggy and Scooby ask if they can see Eric's video game, but just then, Professor Kaufman shows up and tells them that no one is playing the game until their problems are solved. And Scooby-Doo just looks like he's having the time of his life with the lab equipment. Eric introduces Professor Kaufman to the Mystery Inc. gang, to which the professor tells the gang that he needs their help with his own mystery. Eric and Professor Kaufman explain that they're laser-beamed a monster, instantly frightening Shaggy and Scooby away. As Eric, Bill, and the professor explain the virus to the gang, the security guard listens in. Velma explains that computer viruses don't just randomly appear, and they're created by someone. Eric instantly denies creating the virus, and Fred asks if they can see how the laser works. Professor Kaufman lets Eric show them the demo. Fun fact, the voice of Eric is our friend and previous guest, Bob Bergen. You guys remember Bob, of course. He's the voice of Porky Pig and Tweety for Looney Tunes. Eric kind of looks like Bob, too. And while we're at it, this also was the first Scooby-Doo movie to feature Grey DeLisle as the voice of Daphne after the passing of Mary Kay Bergman. When Eric shows his game to the gang, it's revealed to have the same name as the movie, but since the virus came from the game, the gang is unable to play it. Bill, on the other hand, made a baseball game that is completely virus-free, and he claims that it's more entertaining. Bill plays some of it for the gang, and Fred is intrigued by it. Shaggy tells Bill, "Baseball's okay, but it doesn't have Scooby and me in it." Eric continues to explain his Scooby-Doo game to the gang. Through 10 levels, the object of the game is to battle monsters and villains while on the hunt for a box of Scooby snacks. And boy, does that excite Scooby or what? After Eric sets the box of Scooby snacks on the table, Professor Kaufman turns on the laser. The Scooby snacks disappear and show up on the computer monitor. Daphne says, "I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it with my own eyes." Shaggy says, I don't believe it either. We didn't get one Scooby snack. Professor Kaufman praises Bill and Eric, saying that they will definitely win the $250,000 grand prize at the International Science Fair for their hard work and talent, but Eric praises Professor Kaufman for being such a good teacher and should share the reward, but Professor Kaufman thinks that Bill and Eric should get the credit. After Shaggy asks Eric to get the Scooby Snacks box out of the game and he and Scooby fight over them, Fred asks Eric if that's how the virus came out of the game. Daphne questions what the virus could do outside of the computer, and Professor Kaufman explains that the virus is powerful enough to steal every computer program in the world, adding that when the virus attacked Eric earlier, he held up a magnet which weakened the virus. However, it only made it run off. Velma asks how they can help, and Eric tells the gang that if they can get the virus to the lab, he can use the laser to return the virus to cyberspace. Shaggy and Scooby refuse to be virus bait, but of course, Velma offers them a Scooby snack. Scooby is tempted right away, but Shaggy doesn't think only one Scooby snack is exactly fair, so Velma offers one to each of them, which Shaggy and Scooby both accept. Is it just me, or is it a little weird that Velma treats Shaggy like a dog too? She throws the Scooby snacks for both of them and tells them to go long. Shaggy's a human. Shaggy doesn't think that they'll be able to find the virus in such a big place, just as Velma asks how they can capture it. Professor Kaufman explains that the virus is made up of electromagnetic energy, and if they can get close enough to him with the magnets that the professor had to weaken the virus before, the same thing will happen. But the magnets are so strong that just as Scooby takes one, the thumbtacks from the bulletin board fly off and land onto the magnet as Scooby runs off in fear. At night, the gang searches around for the virus, but Fred thinks that in such a big place, they'd probably have better luck finding him if they split up. Knowing what's coming, Shaggy and Scooby head in their direction, and Fred, Daphne, and Velma go in their own group. The first place they head is the basement. So far, the only things that they find are lab equipment that Fred says looks like it should be in the Smithsonian. Velma thinks that a lot of these things could be quite valuable as she sets down the magnet and dusts off a book from an old bookshelf, but the dust gets in the virus's face. The gang gets out of the way before the virus strikes, but when the virus takes a step, he steps on the magnet, causing him to fall back. Seeing the virus weaken prompts Daphne and Fred to hold up their magnets. The virus takes off walking like he broke his leg, and Fred, Daphne, and Velma go after him. And where do you think Shaggy and Scooby are? In the cafeteria. This kind of reminds me of The Witch's Ghost. Remember when they were in the restaurant and all the customers looked so grossed out by Shaggy and Scooby eating? That's exactly what everyone in the cafeteria is doing. Everyone's so disgusted by Shaggy and Scooby's poor manners that they just leave. Back in the basement, Fred, Daphne, and Velma are still on the hunt for the virus. Fred thinks that they lost him until he spots a light at the end of the hall. When they hold up their magnets, it's revealed to just be Wembley, the security guard from before. The security guard questions why they're in the basement, and Velma explains that they're hunting for the phantom virus. Wembley tells the gang that he did hear about the virus because he was eavesdropping on their conversation with Eric, Bill, and the professor, and believes that it's a college prank, mostly pointing the finger at Fred, and has the gang come with him to the lab. Finally, the cafeteria's run out of food because Shaggy and Scooby ate all of it, but just then the phantom virus arrives and Shaggy and Scooby run away when he strikes the table. How do Shaggy and Scooby even have the energy to run? Shaggy and Scooby find their way into the psychology department, but the virus follows them there, where Shaggy and Scooby are disguised as a doctor and nurse who sit the virus down and attach wires to him. They ask him some questions that the virus doesn't know the answer to, so Scooby shocks him for every wrong answer. The virus has had enough of that and pulls the wires off and chases the gang around the lab to the classic Scooby Doo theme song, performed by the B-52s. No matter how close the Phantom gets to Shaggy and Scooby, they always find some way to stop him. You'd think he would give up, eh? And how does that virus even feel pain? Isn't he supposed to be a phantom? Meanwhile, Wembley has taken Fred, Daphne, and Velma to Kaufman's lab, where the gang grows concerned about Shaggy and Scooby. Fred feels they should go look for them, but Wembley puts a stop to that, still waiting for Professor Kaufman, just as Shaggy and Scooby show up, still running away from the phantom virus. Fred, Daphne, and Velma try to catch up to Scooby and Shaggy and the virus, but the gang ends up crashing into each other just as a mysterious shadowy hand turns the laser on and beams the Mystery Inc. gang into Eric's game. Eric, Bill, Professor Kaufman, and Wembley all notice that the laser was fired, and Bill goes to check, discovering that the Mystery Inc. gang was sent into cyberspace. Wembley suggests throwing a switch to bring them back, but Eric explains that the only way that they can get out of the game is if they play through all the levels. Level 1 depicts the Mystery Inc. gang in spacesuits on the moon. Shaggy's impressed that the game has also made him strong enough to lift up a large moon rock and can also make him jump higher, but he soon realizes that he can still get hurt even in a video game. Velma says, "Or worse." Just then, Shaggy spots the virus. Velma surmises that he must have gotten beamed into the game with them. Well, at least that'll keep him away from the university, but when Scooby runs off, or floats off because they're on the moon, he gets chased by very evil-looking space creatures, who the virus sends to chase the Mystery Inc. gang. They manage to hide behind a rock, and Velma suggests that if they play along, they can figure out who the virus was created by. The gang remembers that the object of the game is to find a box of Scooby snacks, which Shaggy finds almost immediately next to a United States flag. But then the Phantom and his, let's call them minions, prepare to attack. Luckily, Scooby spots a moon rover that looks very similar to the Mystery Machine. The gang uses the moon rover to get away from the virus, but he and his crew have their own ride to follow the gang and strike at them. Their vehicle seems to be going much faster than the Mystery Machine moon rover, and it finally gets struck by the virus. But once they stop, they're much closer to the box of Scooby snacks. Scooby heads for the box, but the Phantom isn't too far behind him. However, his vehicle trips over a crater. The virus signals his minions to go after Scooby, but he successfully reaches the box, finishing level 1 and moving on to the next level, set in the Roman Colosseum. Shaggy thinks that it's where they play football, but Velma explains that people in ancient Rome used to watch a variety of different events, with Fred adding that it's most famous for being the place where the Romans were fed to the lions. Fred notices a grouping of chalk lines shaped like a square in the center of the Colosseum, just as Scooby notices the virus to begin the next level. Now, I thought that the gang was going to have to fight off lions, but this time, they're going up against a group of skeleton gladiators, I guess. Shaggy says, "Those guys look like they've got a bone to pick." Just then, the virus signals their mascot, a lion. Aha, I was right. A lion with a box of Scooby snacks in his mouth. Shaggy and Scooby decide that they aren't in the mood for Scooby snacks. The lion drops the box and Scooby runs off, the rest of the gang not too long after, as the skeletons follow them with weapons. They trap Shaggy in a net and the rest of the Mystery Inc. gang go back for him. The lion and the weird skeleton creatures close in on the gang when Scooby notices a chariot, again designed after the Mystery Machine. Scooby uses it to pull Shaggy as the skeletons get closer and closer to him. Shaggy prompts Scooby to run faster, and Fred has them handle the skeleton gladiators, while he, Daphne, and Velma handle the lion. Daphne questions how they're going to take care of the lion, and Fred asks her to give him her jacket. Daphne is hesitant as she just bought the jacket, although she's worn it in the last few Scooby Doo movies, but Daphne gives in and Fred uses it like a bullfighting cape. At first the lion's a bit confused, but Fred handles the lion like a matador would handle a bull. Daphne gets an idea of her own. While Fred continues to fight the lion, not ride it, a little joke for my family, Daphne and Velma open the gate. The lion almost hits Fred, but makes it to the gate and Daphne and Velma trap it. Daphne kisses Fred and praises him for his bravery, and he gives Daphne her jacket back. But they forgot something. Shaggy and Scooby are still being chased by the gladiators, and now they've started to destroy the chariot, but it releases Shaggy from the net. But when they realize that the gladiators are getting closer, they run off, but the dust from the movement of their feet blurs the gladiators' vision. Fred has Shaggy and Scooby keep the gladiators distracted while he gets the box of Scooby snacks, but they don't think that they have the energy to keep running from them. However, they change their minds when the gladiators' weapons nearly strike Shaggy and Scooby. While Fred goes to get the Scooby snacks, he has Shaggy and Scooby use the gladiators' weapons to pole vault over the wall, but the gladiators had a similar idea. One does the same as Shaggy and Scooby, and the other two climb over the wall. Shaggy and Scooby disguise themselves again in Roman costumes, having the gladiators bow to Emperor Scooby. This creates a distraction as they walk past the gladiators, but Shaggy accidentally steps on Scooby's outfit, making the gladiators angry that they were tricked. However, Fred already got the Scooby Snacks box, and the gang is transported to the next level. Level 3 appears to be set in some kind of jungle. Shaggy and Scooby are happy to be free of ancient Rome until they learn that the land is inhabited by dinosaurs. Fred notices a dinosaur eating a tree until Shaggy and Scooby spot the Phantom Virus riding a Tyrannosaurus Rex closing in on the Mystery Inc. gang with a spear in his hand. Fred has the gang head for the trees so they won't be able to follow them. Back at the lab, Eric, Bill, Wembley, and Professor Kaufman watch the gang's progress. Wembley begins to wonder who activated the laser sending them into the game. Bill points out that it could be anyone, to which Professor Kaufman says, "Even someone in this very room." The Mystery Inc. gang manages to find a cave to hide from the virus and the dinosaurs. To pass the time, Shaggy and Scooby draw pictures of food on the caves. Velma's very impressed by them, and even more so by the drawing of a volcano on the wall. Shaggy and Scooby claim that neither of them drew that just as the fire goes out. Velma sends Shaggy and Scooby to get some wood for the fire. While on the hunt, the pair notice that the trees are burning as a result of a volcano, similar to the one drawn on the cave walls. Shaggy and Scooby head back to the cave to warn the rest of the gang of the volcano. Fred, Daphne, and Velma have a look outside, and Velma figures that perhaps the Scooby Snacks box is inside of the volcano. But the volcano's too far away, so the gang hitches a ride on 2 woolly mammoths, even though Velma points out that dinosaurs and mammoths are from different ages, while the rest of the gang complains about the smell. The gang finally makes it to the volcano just as it erupts and the mammoths take off. But Daphne spots a baby pterodactyl whose wing is caught on a rock as the virus and the T-Rex make their way to the Mystery Inc. gang. The gang begins to climb the volcano, and even though the T-Rex can't follow them, the virus throws a spear that misses them. However, the lava begins pouring out of the volcano faster. Velma spots the pterodactyl's mother trying to save its baby, prompting Scooby to help, and climbs to their direction, freeing the pterodactyl of the rock and revealing the box of Scooby Snacks. As the lava gets closer, the pterodactyl lifts Scooby away and he takes the box of Scooby Snacks with him, transporting the gang to level 4 before they're burned in lava. In level 4, the gang finds themselves underwater, grabbing a box of Scooby Snacks from a treasure chest on an abandoned ship before a shark gets them first, moving them on to the next level. Through a montage, we see the gang get away from bugs, ninjas, mummies, dragons, even rescuing a princess to get a box of Scooby Snacks, and a polar bear before they reach a street. Daphne believes that they've beaten the game, but Fred notices some of the simulation. Eric reveals that they're at the final level, but like most video games, it's the toughest level yet. While trying to figure out where to start, Fred spots some lady on the street corner and the gang heads to her direction to ask for help, but it turns out to be the Phantom Virus in a disguise. Trying to escape, the gang decides to hide in a mall shop where they meet cyber versions of themselves, mostly modeled after their classic looks from the original Scooby Doo series. While hanging out with their cyber selves, the Mystery Inc. gang tells them about the Phantom Virus, but because the virus isn't part of the game, he's not after the cyber gang, but he overhears them talking and the gang joins the cyber gang in their cyber mystery machine. As they keep talking to each other about the real world and the cyber world, Cyber Shaggy informs the gang that they know where the Scooby Snacks are, but feels it would be pointless to go after them as in the cyber world, they will go back to the start of the game. Fred then figures that they should all team up to stop the Phantom Virus, and after Cyber Shaggy realizes that he would always go after a box of Scooby Snacks, the Mystery Inc. gang and their cyber counterparts decide to team together. The group heads to a boardwalk carnival and head to the arcade, where Cyber Shaggy says the Scooby Snacks are. But on the way there, they hear a mysterious sound, which Cyber Scooby points out is a baseball coming from a batting cage. The gang watches a very shadowy figure play, but it's revealed to be the Phantom Virus. The virus hits a baseball to the direction of the gang, and they all get out of the way, heading for the arcade, but they get stopped by the Creeper from the original Scooby Doo Where Are You series, joined by Jaguaro from the Scooby Doo show. The gang gets surrounded by more and more creatures from previous Scooby Doo series, including Gator Ghoul, the Tar Monster, and Old Iron Face, all of whom Eric had learned about from stories that the Mystery Inc. gang has shared with him. The villains get closer and closer to the gang, but then Velma remembers that in the real world, there were always just people wearing costumes. But when Scooby and Cyber Scooby try to take off Gator Ghoul's mask, it's revealed that he's real, meaning that the others are as well. I mean, it was only the design of the villains that went into the game, not the people who were in the costumes, so that kinda makes sense. The gang escapes the carnival, and the Phantom Virus orders the villains to follow after. As the Tar Monster looks around, Shaggy and Cyber Shaggy both show up disguised as carnival barkers to get the Tar Monster to play a strength test game, but distract him by hitting him on the foot with a mallet. Daphne and Cyber Daphne hide in what appears to be a haunted house, but while looking around, they release a trapdoor. Cyber Daphne points out that there are many around, so Daphne decides to be on the lookout while they continue hiding. As they keep looking around, they both come across those trick mirrors that they have in carnivals, with Cyber Daphne at first believing that she's fat, until Daphne tells her that she looks perfect. Just then, the Creeper shows up behind Cyber Daphne. While trying to get away, Daphne remembers the trapdoor and releases it, causing the Creeper to fall. But he starts to climb back up until Daphne closes the trapdoor before he can make it. Fred and Cyber Fred are trying to get away from Gator Ghoul on a roller coaster, but Gator Ghoul is still behind them. The closer he gets to them, Cyber Fred notices that part of the roller coaster is broken. Fred tells Cyber Fred to jump off, noticing a bounce house below. Before Gator Ghoul snaps, Fred and Cyber Fred jump off the roller coaster, safely landing on the bounce house, and once the roller coaster reaches the broken part, Gator Ghoul is launched off. This makes me think of, What's New, Scooby Doo? Anybody remember an episode where they were at an amusement park to solve the mystery of this monster, the roller ghoster? Like, I loved that when I was a kid. Anyway, Velma and Cyber Velma find themselves in a wax museum where they find old Iron Face. But while trying to escape, they both bump into each other and drop their glasses. But while trying to find them, old Iron Face trips and falls back into a cauldron full of melting wax. However, this does not defeat him. Old Iron Face emerges from the cauldron covered in wax, but it doesn't take too long for it to harden, but he breaks free of it as Velma and Cyber Velma escape. Jaguaro finds himself at a carousel where Scooby and Cyber Scooby are posed to blend in. However, Cyber Scooby's sneeze alerts Jaguaro as he, in traditional Scooby-Doo fashion, chases Scooby and Cyber Scooby around the carousel. But they manage to escape until Jaguaro is chasing nothing, and they speed up the carousel until Jaguaro flies off. Fred and Cyber Fred catch up to them, but Gator Ghoul appears behind them, but Shaggy and Cyber Shaggy crash into him while trying to get away from the tar monster. Meanwhile, the Creeper managed to escape the trapdoor and follow Daphne and Cyber Daphne into some saloon. They distract him by dressing him up in a Western outfit to take his picture. Once the camera flash explodes, Daphne and Cyber Daphne have escaped. Velma and Cyber Velma found themselves at a petting zoo where old Iron Face catches up to them. But a goat catches up to old Iron Face. The gang and their cyber counterparts go all around the boardwalk in a montage defeating the villains. The Cyber Gang eventually meets up with the Mystery Inc. gang, having defeated everyone, with only the Phantom Virus left. Velma doesn't think the virus will be easy to beat because of it being the final level, but Shaggy discovers that he still has the magnet from Professor Kaufman. However, when he holds it up, it affects the Cyber Gang, as they are made up of electromagnetic energy. This makes the gang realize that they now have a way to defeat the virus as they head to the arcade. Fred tells the Cyber Gang to stay put to prevent them from being affected by the magnet. The gang makes it to the arcade and start hunting for the virus just as Daphne and Velma notice the box of Scooby snacks on a Scooby Doo arcade game. Scooby starts to dart over to the box, but gets stopped by the Phantom Virus's laugh as he emerges from the game. As the Phantom Virus begins wreaking havoc on the arcade, Velma reminds Shaggy of his magnet. Shaggy holds it up, but it's not close enough to the virus for him to be weakened by it. Shaggy's a bit too nervous to go anywhere near him, so Fred suggests that he throw the magnet to Fred as he approaches the virus holding the magnet up. With the virus distracted by the magnet, Scooby heads over to get the Scooby snacks, but Fred slips on a ball and drops the magnet. With the virus no longer weakened by the magnet, he uses the wires from one of the games to trap Fred and continues causing havoc before Scooby can reach the box of Scooby snacks. The Cyber Gang watches as the virus goes out of control and decide to help the gang, but they get surrounded by the other villains. The gang tries to escape, but Cyber Scooby makes his way to the arcade to help. He tries to free Fred of the wires, but that doesn't work. But Fred gets an idea. Cyber Scooby whispers Fred's plan to Scooby Doo, and Cyber Scooby distracts the Phantom Virus, causing him to strike and trap Cyber Scooby with wiring from the games. But then, Scooby Doo manages to grab the box of Scooby snacks, freeing Fred and Cyber Scooby from the wires, and defeating the Phantom Virus and the other old-school Scooby Doo villains. The Mystery Inc. gang says goodbye to their cyber counterparts and are returned to Professor Kaufman's lab. Eric and Wembley are relieved that everyone is alright, and Professor Kaufman congratulates the gang on defeating the virus. Bill asks the gang if they know who created it, and Fred answers that he has his suspicions. Professor Kaufman believes that whoever created the virus should be punished, to which Velma points out that he's a suspect himself, as he could have used the video game himself to make $250,000 at the science fair. Not to mention, earlier he did say that whoever created the virus could have been someone in this very room. I mean, why else would he have said that? Shaggy and Scooby suspect that the virus was created by Wembley, to which he of course goes on about how he's an officer of the law, sort of, but Fred points out that he was the only one in the lab with them when the laser beamed them into the game. The gang then points out that while they were in the game, they found some clues. Clue number 1 was when the Phantom Virus yelled "play ball" on the moon level. The second clue was on the Coliseum level with the chalk lines. But the biggest clue was when they found the Phantom Virus at the batting cage, which makes Eric realize that Bill was the one who created the virus as he tries to escape. Yeah, he knows he's in now. Bill tries to get away, but he gets cornered by the Mystery Inc. gang and Wembley before he trips over Scooby's tail and is arrested by Wembley. Eric and Professor Kaufman feel betrayed by Bill, with Bill explaining that he also felt hurt because Professor Kaufman chose Eric's project over Bill's, with Velma surmising that Bill created the Phantom Virus to hopefully scare Eric away, as Bill had been at the school longer. Bill says, "That's right, and it worked, until you guys showed up." Fred points out that it was Bill who beamed the gang into the game, fearing being found out. As Wembley takes Bill away, he says, "The prize would have been all mine, if it wasn't for..." But having heard it so many times, the Mystery Inc. gang finishes Bill's sentence. "Us meddling kids!" To thank the Mystery Inc. gang for defeating the Phantom Virus, Eric takes the gang out to lunch. Eric apologizes for them being trapped in the gang, but the gang actually didn't mind it and praise Eric for his designs. Shaggy, however, suggests that Eric go easier on the monsters. Eric pulls up the Scooby Doo game on his computer and invites Shaggy to play, but when he logs in, the Cyber Mystery Inc. gang appears on the screen and waves to the gang, with Scooby Doo feeding his cyber counterpart a box of virtual Scooby snacks. And there we go, Scooby Doo and the Cyber Chase. And there actually is a video game based on this movie for PlayStation and Game Boy Advance, and it pretty much has most of the same levels. If you collect vintage video games, maybe this one is worth trying out. And what I liked about this film was the nostalgia of the outfits of the Cyber Gang and all the classic Scooby-Doo villains. And looking back on it, because it was in the early 2000s, made me realize how far technology and video games have come since then. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about it, and I'll see you next time.